Federal State of Northern Luzon, Federal State of Central Luzon, Federal State of Southern Tagalog, Federal State of the Bicol area, and Federal State of the Cordilleras. And for the Visayas, Mr. Chairman, 4, Federal State of Eastern Visayas, Federal State of Central Visayas, Federal State of Western Visayas, your area, Mr. President. And the 4th one, I have to make a little pitch for it, because the 4th one, Mr. President, forgive me for saying so, that I think that some imperialist thinkers in Manila believe that this 4th area that I am considering as the 4th federal state of the Visayas is part of Luzon. And I'm referring to the 2 Mindoro provinces, Palawan, Romblon, and Masbate, and Marinduque. Why should this be considered a part of Luzon when these are located in the Visayan Seas? And so this will be the 4th federal state of the Visayas. And in Mindanao, Mr. President, Federal State of Northern Mindanao, from the tip of Zamboanga all the way up to Surigao, which is a fairly large stretch of land, which may be divided into 2, but for purposes of our discussion, we're only saying 1 Federal State of Northern Mindanao. The second is the Federal State of Southern Mindanao, where Davao, Cotabato, etc. are located. And the third, to my mind, Mr. President, a very important one, is the Federal State of the Bangsamoro. Unless we come up with the Federal State of the Bangsamoro, the shooting war in Mindanao, Mr. President, will continue. Up to today, even as we talk, there are ambuscades being staged in many parts of Mindanao, and all because, the culture and tradition of the Muslim people are not fully respected by the majority of our people, even as of today. And so, to make a long story short, Mr. Chairman, that would be the configuration of the federal states that I am proposing. And on the side, I want to make off record also, Mr. Chairman, that we should consider Sabah as a part of the Republic of the Philippines. Very often, Mr. President, when we look at the map of the Philippines, we talk only about Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And yet, as a matter of fact, Sabah is ours, Mr. President. And that goes back all the way to the time of the Sultan of Brunei asking the help of his cousin, the Sultan of Sulu, to repel their enemies, Mr. President, centuries back. When they were able to repel their enemies, the Sultan of Brunei gave Sabah as a reward to the Sultan of Sulu. And through the years, Mr. President, the heirs of the Sultan of Sulu asserted their ownership over that parcel of land. As a matter of fact, when there was an enterprising businessman, Baron Overbeck, and his business partner. I want to clarify what I mean by partner, Mr. President, because nowadays partners are a different connotation. But Baron Overbeck had a partner, Mr. Dent, and they both went to the Sultan of Brunei, the Sultan of Sulu, asking permission to develop, Sabah. To make a long story short, a lease agreement was entered into by the Sultan of Sulu with the Baron Overbeck and his business partner. And they call that agreement, Mr. Chairman, pajak in the Malay language. meaning to say a lease agreement whereby what's his name, Baron Overbeck and his business partner would develop Sabah, but upon payment of, at that time, Mr. President, $75,000 a year. A year for the entire Sabah, Mr. President. But in any event, over the years, the Baron Overbeck continued to pay the Sultan of Sulu and his heirs. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, let me just say that the complication arose when at some point Baron Overbeck and his business partner surrendered their lease agreement over Sabah, not to the Sultan of Sulu, but to the British Empire, Mr. President. And when Malaysia became independent in 1948, the British government also surrendered the agreement to the to the Malaysian government, laying the basis for Malaysia's claim over Sabah today. But to make a long story short, Mr. President, what I'm trying to say, let us keep it in mind that Sabah is a part of the Republic of the Philippines, and there are documentary evidences which can stand the test of United Nations, the institutions of the United Nations that would cover such controversies, Mr. President. So, let me just say also that in our proposal to adopt a federal system, the President and the Vice President will still be elected by the nation at large. But our proposal is they should be elected as a tandem, because I think that over the years, and I'm not referring to Vice President Lenny and President Digong today, over the years, you know that, Mr. President, that when the President and the Vice President come from different parties, upon election, controversies begin to arise.
And one is not allowed to attend cabinet meetings.
Pardon?
Sometimes the vice president is not allowed to attend cabinet meetings.
Correct. And that would arise usually also from the fact that the vice president, if he or she comes from another party, upon election, will be saying a lot of novenas, kailan ba mamatay itong lokong ito para ako na magiging presidente. But kidding aside, the election of president and vice president should be retained as one. Now, regarding the Senate, Mr. President, incidentally, the congressmen will be, there's no change, elected by district. The senators, however, Mr. President, I would like to suggest that the senators should be elected by federal state to ensure that every part of this republic will be duly represented in the Senate. In the last elections, Mr. President, only you, coming from the Visayas, only Senate President Drilon was elected senator. Nobody was elected to represent Eastern Visayas, Central Visayas, and Mindoro, the Mindoro provinces that I had adverted to earlier. And in Mindanao, only Mick Subiri and Senator Pacquiao. The rest of Mindanao. Huh? Last election. So, I am suggesting that the senators, therefore, should be elected by federal state, so that we ensure that all parts of this republic will be duly represented in the upper chamber of our legislature. And in this regard, I am also suggesting that we should have 6 senators per federal state. So, 6 times 12, that's how many? 72 already. And the normal reactions, yung dami naman yun. But Mr. President, I will submit to you later on a study that I made where nations which have fewer population have bigger representation in their upper chamber. And I'd like to advert to the fact that the 24 number of senators that we have today was based on the population of the Philippines at the time of Quezon and Osmeña, when we were only about 18 to 20 million. But now, sobrang palaanak ang Pilipino, we are now 104 million people, Mr. President. And so, just to fast-track this statement, I want to advert to the fact that the United Kingdom has 6.60 million people, and they have 797 members of the upper chamber. While we have 104 million people, we only have 24. France, 64 million people, 348 members of the upper chamber. And the Philippines only 24. Italy, 59 million, 315 senators. Spain, 46 million, 266. Thailand, 68 million, 150. And this is based on the recent constitutional revision that they had. While we have only 24. Australia, which has more, I think, sheep than people, Australia has 24.31 million people. They have 76 senators. We 104, we only have 24. Malaysia, 30 million people, 70 senators, Mr. Chairman. And so there is a basis to say that we should increase. And add more to the point, if you elect the senators by federal state, the people would know their capacities. They would know them more intimately, and therefore would be prepared to elect qualified people to the positions that we are seeking. So, Mr. President, what else? On the judiciary, Mr. President, the effect of our proposal to adopt the federal system is that there shall still be one Supreme Court. But what we are saying is that the Court of Appeals, which to my understanding, they have about 30 divisions, and there are only some divisions in Cebu and other divisions in Cagayan de Oro. But the rest of the country have no representation from the various courts of appeal. By distributing the courts of appeal to the various federal states, Mr. President, we assure that our people will have easy access to the jurisdictions defined by law regarding matters of controversy among the citizens, and thereby hopefully ensure the fast delivery of justice in this country. Because, Mr. President, if you will notice, one of the biggest problems of this country is the fact that justice is very slowly delivered. And just to cite to you an example, today I'm supposed to go to the RTC in Regional Trial Court here in Manila, attending to the case of the killing of the son of Pistaño. And that happened, more than 20 years ago. And do you know, Mr. President, that up to now we're still having a trial at regional trial court level. So, one of the things that we want to do is to introduce, Mr. President, in the revision of our Constitution, when we adopt the federal system, that deadlines for decisions must be specified. In other words, we should not allow the Supreme Court to, okay, you file a case, okay, but when we decided, that's up to us. There should be specific limitations, Mr. President. And in my recollection, I'll give you a more detailed documentary replica of what I'm trying to say. The decisions of the Supreme Court should be issued 2 years from filing, Mr. President. We should not allow the Supreme Court to sit on the cases that are pending before them. Otherwise, delivery of justice, which is guaranteed by the Constitution, will be put to naught. So, Court of Appeals, 1.8 months. Regional, Sandigan Bayan also 1.8 months. Regional Trial Court, 1.6 months. Mga City Court and Municipal Court, 1 year or something like that. But there should be specific time frames within which they should decide. Otherwise, as I said, Mr. President, the guarantee about speedy delivery of justice will just be a mockery as it is today. So, what else do I want to say? Okay. On the matter of revising the Constitution, Mr. President, the best way really is through a constitutional convention, because this is where the people will have a chance to, express their own selves regarding what matters would be decided or would be revised in the Constitution. But if what the preference of the President now seems to be is to be followed, which is a Constituent Assembly, then let it be. The important thing is that, as the Senate President himself has already indicated, the committee would be conducting public hearings in various places. You name 4 areas, Mr. President, and I would suggest that much more areas be covered, so that when the hearings are conducted there, at least the people will have a chance to ventilate their own views. Now, on the issue of deliberations, whether jointly or separately, my point of view is that deliberations should be done jointly, but voting should be done separately, so that the 24 number of senators will not be swallowed by the 200 plus members of the House of Representatives, Mr. President. So yun na lang siguro, Mr. President. Salamat for this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Nene. Laila, would you have questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Wouldn't the proposal of the very distinguished resource speaker for the inclusion of the Saba issue into the issue of federalism would further complicate the discourse and the entire process?
Madam Chair, Vice Chair, no, the thing is that if we add the issue of Sabah to the configuration of the Philippines as part of the Republic, it will probably be a more complicated one. Because certainly we do not expect Malaysia to just keep quiet about it. And my understanding, however, is that one of the reasons why Sabah has been put on the side of, the definition of our national territory is the fact that, for example, under the presidency of Noynoy Aquino, they were using the Malaysians as the broker for peace. And therefore there was, I think they would have felt awkward, to say the least, to, insist on defining Sabah as a part of the Philippines when it is actively being claimed by Malaysia. So, how do we resolve that issue? Well, we have to use the you might say, the institutions of the United Nations, especially those relating to the Convention of the Law of the Sea, and get them to apply wherever possible. But let us not forget that Sabah is ours, because otherwise the tendency of the millennials will be to forget that, that the Philippines is only this part, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, period. Forgetting that Sabah is ours and even Scarborough.
Certainly, such posturing of the very distinguished former senator evokes or evinces a very high sense of nationalism and patriotism, to really, propagate or perpetuate the position, the collective position of the country that Sabah ought to be considered as ours. But insofar as the issue of federalism, there is of course very serious reservation about including such discourse, including such a proposed course of action, because it will certainly not only complicate but further delay the process. But having said that, Mr. Chair, in as much as we're now tackling the issue of federalism, and I would not know yet who among the other resource speakers present today are also pro-federalism. But for proper perspective, because I have yet to come up with my own position on federalism, on the issue of whether it's CONAS or CON, my personal stand, my firm personal stand is for constitutional convention. Although I am open to arguments in favor of CONAS, but cannot as yet make a definitive stand on the matter. So of course, on the issue of whether it's voting separately or jointly, I don't think any thinking senator would agree to a joint voting. Joint deliberations, yes, but certainly not joint voting, because it would turn Senate into an irrelevant institution. Now, on the federalism, for better perspective po, I would really want to understand or imagine what President Duterte's federal constitution would look like. Because I have not seen, yes, the idea of federalism has been repeatedly broached, including those, the pro-federalism advocates, but I haven't seen the details, I haven't seen the mechanics. As they say, almost always the devil is on the details. The president offers federalism as a panacea or cure-all to the country's problems. So what exactly would the president's federal constitution look like? Several questions may be raised on Duterte's proposed federal setup. But the most important is what specific powers are left to the federal government, considering that in a federal setup, powers that are not expressly assigned are presumed to be reserved for the states and provinces. Is that correct? Unlike in a unitary system where the presumption is always in favor of the national government. I'm throwing out these questions. I'm not sure whether all of this can be discussed during this public hearing, but this can be subject matter of written submissions from any, or from any, some, or all of the invited resource persons. So specifically, this would be the questions. Will the states or the provinces have power to determine their own laws and policies that are otherwise national in scope, example, civil, criminal law, environment, etc.? Of course, on the matter of the judiciary or the judicial system that was articulated upon already by Senator Pimentel. Now, will the Philippines be a country where the death penalty is implemented in one state or province and abolished in the other, assuming the death penalty would be reimposed by Congress? I hope not, because I am definitely anti-death penalty. Can I first throw, sir, my questions for your consideration? You may or may not answer these questions now. Now, how will environmental management be addressed in ecosystems that traverse state or provincial boundaries? Shall national parks and protected areas remain under federal management? What will be the impact of the decentralization of such policy formulation on a small nation state, such as the Philippines? We are composed of thousands of islands, but certainly we are small nation state. What are the assurances that the rigidity of policy change identified with the federal setup will not hamper poverty alleviation programs of the national government, considering that under a federal setup, poverty alleviation will most probably be mainly a state or a provincial concern rather than a federal obligation? And what is the impact of federalism on political warlords and political patronage that characterize local Philippine politics? Will federalism exacerbate the patronage system, or will it eliminate it? How will federalism eliminate warlordism and private armies in the countrysides? How will federalism expand the democratic base for politics in localities where political dynasties control a huge patronage of the local economy? What will Duterte's federalism add to the powers of local government and autonomous regions already provided in existing laws? What are the dynamics in power relations between the national government and states and provinces that will change beyond what is already provided under the local government code and the autonomous acts, or even the BBL, if it will be reinstated or restored, or any version of the BBL will be considered? Because anti-federalism advocates are insisting that it's just a matter of putting in the right amendments to the local government code instead of going through the extreme change or turn into federalism. How will the federalism achieve what decentralization and devolution under the local government code and the autonomous acts have not? So those are just some of the questions that I want to throw into the table for me to be able to be convinced, or for me to be convinced about the merits and the beauty of federalism, because as I mentioned, I have not decided yet on this matter. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to raise some thoughts.
Maybe Senator Pimentel can briefly respond in general
Yes.
to the concerns. We need not go into the very specific answers, given the fact that many of these can be threshed out if we either have a con-us or a con-con. So maybe very briefly, Senator Pimentel can respond to the queries of my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to point out the fact that under the proposed federal setup that we are discussing, incidentally, I have not talked to the President about this. He's busy with so many things, and we never had a chance to talk. But essentially, we are one that there should be a federal system adopted in this republic. Now, on the issue, Mr. President, of political dynasties, let me say that accompanying this proposal to adopt a federal system is the power of the state to maintain only one armed forces of the Philippines, which will be used to crush any political dynasties that will try to subvert the intention of the Constitution for a more democratic way of life in any part of the country. And therefore, with one armed forces of the Philippines, that would guarantee that any political dynasty emerging in any of the federal state will be crushed accordingly, because that would be that would be repugnant to the intention of having a democratic republic under a federal system of government. Also, Mr. President, there should be only one national police. Why? So that national laws on crime will be enforced by one national police regardless of the boundaries of the federal states. In other words, if a criminal in Cebu commits homicide, he cannot just fly to the Cordilleras and say, I'm in another federal state, therefore you cannot touch me anymore. No, sir. Even if we are a federal state, there will be one enforcement of national laws regarding crimes, Mr. President. So, also, there shall be one monetary system. Because otherwise, if every federal state will have its own money, I mean, it will be bad, difficult for us, for all of us to transact business in the country. One flag, Mr. President, unlike the U.S., where every federal state has its own flag. We will only have one flag, so we will salute only one flag throughout the country, Mr. President. Then, one foreign policy. Because we cannot have federal states having foreign policies, with other countries in relation to state, you might say, state relationships, Mr. President. But there should only be one curriculum, Mr. President. Because if you are a resident of Negros and you want to transfer your family and you have a 2-year-old boy in Negros, he should be, that son or daughter should be admitted in other parts of the country, even if you happen to go to another federal state. But in the matter of investments, Mr. President, investments should be left to the definition of the federal states concerned of what is good for them, for their locality, so that they can provide work for their people. So these are some of the ideas that we are trying to propose.